And to introduce our speaker, please welcome our, you know it, Prince of Programs, Ken Grant. Ken.
Never gets old, never gets old. I want us all to give a huge Seattle Rotary warm welcome to our very special guest today, Kerri Murray. Kerri has been the president of the nonprofit ShelterBox since 2015 and has been in that industry since 2009. Before that, she spent 13 years with GlaxoSmithKline in the US and Europe, working on vaccines, women's health, anti-inflammatories, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. She is a part, I don't know if our esteemed guests, our esteemed members from Santa Barbara on the call, but she is part of the Mendocino Rotary Club, which is part of the Group 8 down there. And she also, for 6 years, has served as the board president for Girls Rock, the dad with two girls gets to say that, Girls Rock, which is a nonprofit empowering and empowers and builds self-esteem for young women, which I love. Oh, through music education. The other really cool thing about ShelterBox is that it's an official project partner of Rotary International in emergencies responding across the world to world disasters and conflict situations. This includes Yemen. I'm probably going to steal part of her thunder right now. Yemen, the Ukraine, Philippines. So without further ado, and a quick shout out to Mark Davis, who is not on the call, but connected the dots with us. So thank you, Mark. Now, without further ado, Kerri, take it away and welcome to the club.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's wonderful to be here. It's a privilege to share the work of ShelterBox with all of you at the Seattle Rotary. I am going to share my screen, if that is okay. And if someone can give me the thumbs up when you can see it, that would be great. Thank you. So, yes, I am a member of the Montecito Rotary Club. I have been a Rotarian for 7 years, and it's been a privilege to serve as the president of ShelterBox during my tenure over the past 7 years. I've been leading this organization. And I know for many of you, it may be the first time you're learning about our organization. So I want to share a bit more about the work that we do. I think it's pretty interesting that you had me today, which today is the 6-month anniversary of the start of the war in Ukraine. And I'm going to be sharing some of the work that we've done to help some of the displaced families there, as well as in the neighboring countries. But as a humanitarian relief organization, ShelterBox is working to tackle one of the biggest issues that's plaguing our world today. And it's this massive displacement of people. There are now over 114 million people in our world who are displaced. These are families who have been displaced by conflict situations, as well as natural disaster situations like you see here. So earthquakes, fires, floods, cyclone situations, as well as violent conflict and civil war like you're seeing in Ukraine. And really, we focus on one of the basic needs we all have as humans, and that is the need for shelter. Our basic needs are around food, water, shelter, access to medical care. For the past 22 years, we have been narrowly focused on the provision of emergency shelter and basic supplies to set up household when you've lost everything in an instant and you're forced to flee your home. So the premise behind ShelterBox is really, what are the things that you need to sustain your life if you lose everything in an instant? And so we provide the center of gravity for what we do, a shelter, and that takes many shapes and sizes. It's everything from tented shelter solutions to shelter kits as well. And in addition to the shelter, we provide a variety of essential items to help set up the household. So 8 organizations bring in food and water. What are you going to boil water and prepare a hot meal? We provide stainless steel cook sets. You've lost power in so many disaster situations. We provide waterproof solar lanterns. You've had contamination of the water source. So we provide water purification as well as containers to store purified water. We also provide places for you to sleep. So waterproof ground mats, blankets, as well as essential tools to help with the repair process. Now, I know some of you may be familiar with the ShelterBox, and this is what you see here, but our organization has really grown to customize the aid and adapt our aid package to meet the unique needs of each disaster or conflict situation we're going into. So you're going to see in the presentation today a variety of different types of tented shelter, as well as essential things like tarpaulins and toolkits. This is one item you're going to see we use right now extensively in Ukraine to help repair homes that have been damaged by the bombing, but basic toolkits to help you repair your home or actually create a single room structure. And we also procure often aid items locally. And so it's what is plentiful. It could be basic things like corrugated iron, like you see here, basic timber, could be mud brick. So we also supplement the aid package with the other items that families need to help create their shelter. Over the past 22 years, we have supported over 2.5 million people with emergency shelter and supplies, and that's growing each and every year. We've worked in over 100 countries in over 300 disaster and conflict situations. How it's possible? Well, one of the things you're going to hear a lot about is Rotary, and Rotary was part of the start of our organization. It were Rotarians that created the initial ShelterBox 22 years ago. There was an earthquake, the Gujarat earthquake, that displaced hundreds of thousands of people, and they created what was the first ShelterBox. It was a millennial project at the time, and ShelterBox had spun out eventually into its own 501c3 nonprofit. We are a separate and distinct charitable organization from Rotary, but we remain the only project partner of Rotary International in emergencies, the official project partner of Rotary in emergencies. And it's Rotarians on the ground that really help facilitate so much of our work globally, particularly in natural disaster responses. And they often serve as volunteers, information sources. They really help with logistics, supply chain. And then many of those Rotarians also serve as part of an elite group called the ShelterBox Response Team. And so we train civilian volunteers from all walks of life all over the world that help facilitate our responses. They are boots on the ground in disasters. They're called the SRT, the ShelterBox Response Team. And when a person applies to become a responder with our organization, they go through about a year of training, remote and then live mock deployments. 1 in 30 people will make it through the response team program and become an official volunteer. And these folks deploy to the front lines at any stage of the disaster response. And we also included response team members in a recent response as part of the response team that actually was responding to Ukraine and Moldova specifically. So these folks really risk their lives to do the work of our organization. And as you can see, the way that they really get the aid to where it needs to go is any way that they can. And we often go to the most remote parts of our response because of just how highly skilled and highly focused our organization is in the provision of emergency shelter for families who are often left behind. We coordinate within the UN system. We feed into the mechanism that's called Camp Management and Coordination and Emergency Shelter. And it's really all about the efficient and effective coordination of nonprofit organizations that work in some of these extraordinary situations and disasters and conflict situations. But we do coordinate with many other organizations. We have international MOUs with groups like Habitat for Humanity. We work with the Red Cross. We work with the UN. Okay, I think that just went off. Sorry about that. Okay, looking at some notable deployments. As I mentioned, we got started in 2000, and over those years, we've responded to some of the world's biggest disaster situations. This was the Indian Ocean tsunami. We also deployed in Haiti. It was one of our largest natural disaster responses in our history. That was the 2010 earthquake. We also responded to Haiti last year after the earthquake that also displaced hundreds of thousands in the southwestern peninsula of that nation. We work extensively in Syria. This is the longest and largest piece of our work in our organization's history. We've brought emergency shelter and supplies to over 550,000 people in this war that's now well over a decade old. And a really different type of aid package, even in this situation where people are often living in some of these bombed out buildings. We provide things like plastic sheeting. We provide basic children's clothing. 83% of Syrians live below the poverty line. Half the pre-war population of that country has been displaced. So we are providing just the essential tools and resources to enable people to really sustain their lives in some of the world's worst conflict zones. And this is really part of the reason why ShelterBox in 2019 and in 2018 was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's for our work in some of the world's most extreme conflict zones. Currently, we are working all over the world. We are working across the Horn of Africa in some of the highest wave of displacement in our world and places like Ethiopia. We're also working in the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, places like Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Niger. We're also working in Mozambique. We're working in Syria, as I mentioned, as well as Ukraine. And we're also monitoring a whole host of different situations around the world. So Ukraine, I know many people are interested in our work within Ukraine and also in the neighboring countries. We deployed immediately once the conflict started. I was part of the first team that went out that was initially staged in Krakow, Poland, and that's where the UN's coordination mechanism was really facilitating the responses. And so we initially started there. But what we eventually moved down, I was working at the border, and I'm going to show you some of those photos, but we moved our response quickly into Ukraine, and this is a map of Ukraine, and in the red is where you see a lot of the violent conflict has been taking place in eastern Ukraine and northern Ukraine. And what you've seen in this situation is an unprecedented level of displacement, people who are moving from east to west. And what you see in these bubbles are the numbers of people who have been internally displaced within the country. So we focused a lot of our work initially in this area around Lviv. And this is where 1.6 million people are sheltering. And we also are working in central and eastern Ukraine. So right now we have over 6 million people who are internally displaced, and you have 6 million people who are refugees who fled to neighboring countries, places like Poland, places like Moldova. So we were determined to really help people really just start their recovery process. And we have a variety of different projects that we've initiated as a result. So one of the things that you've heard about, seen in the news, is obviously a lot of people who have been affected within the country. So what we've done in this situation, I'm going to fast forward to some of these slides, is we've provided basic things like our shelter kits, tarpaulins and tools and fix-ins to help people temporarily shelter in place before they can repair their home. A lot of people are sheltering in place, and we provided basic things like these shelter kits that you see here. We provided hygiene kits, we provided blankets, solar lanterns because there are massive power outages, and we've enabled people to temporarily repair their home. Those tarpaulins can help put a roof on their home. You see there's some corrugated iron here as well. So we're helping people just shelter in place in the short term immediate. And that's what you can see here in some of our projects. This is in central Ukraine as well as eastern Ukraine. We've also focused some efforts on helping people who have been internally displaced, who are sleeping in churches, evacuation centers. We're providing basic things like you see here. These are mattresses, thousands of mattresses, blankets, hygiene kits, lanterns, basic things to help people in this horrible, horrible time in their country's history, and just to help them sustain their life. So this has been, I think, a piece of our work that has been quite a bit in the news. It's gained a lot of attention. But There is so much of our work that is not making the headlines, and so many waves of displacement across our world that really isn't getting the necessary attention that it needs. Places like the Horn of Africa, which is in its worst drought in 4 decades, and that is causing massive waves of displacement there. The Lake Chad Basin of Africa, all over the world, we've seen massive waves of displacement due to both conflict and disaster, and we're responding. The importance of shelter in reducing the spread of COVID. I think it comes as no surprise that all of you will probably agree with me of how important your home has been over the past few years during the pandemic in really helping to protect you and your family and isolate family members. But in so many parts of our world, access to vaccines has been slow or very limited, and there's been a very difficult time in enabling people to distance when they've been displaced and they're in places like refugee camps or evacuation centers. But we've remained absolutely determined to continue to respond. We've increased our work over the past 2 years to enable and ensure that people have access to shelter as well as essential supplies. We've adapted our aid package, so we add things like soap, hand washing basins, we do masks, gloves, sanitizers. Just like everyone else, we've had to adapt the way we work, and that means smaller distribution days when we're distributing aid to our beneficiaries. It means a lot of Zoom trainings for areas that we have been unable to send response team members in because borders are closed. But we've remained absolutely committed to continuing the work of this organization over the past 2 years during the crisis, helping families like Fan. A quiet piece of our work, but a really important piece of our work is in an area called the Lake Chad Basin of Africa. And we centralize a lot of our work in a place called Cameroon. And this has been a large wave of displacement over the past several years, mostly Nigerian refugees like Fan, who've fled into Cameroon because of Boko Haram violence. And Fan was one of the families that our team met during the pandemic. She made her way over the Nigerian border into Cameroon to a place called the Minowao Refugee Camp. And this is a camp that was originally established for 20,000 people. It's now over 70,000 people who find the Minowao camp their home. And she was held in a collective center as she was processed into the camp during the COVID pandemic. It was crowded. She couldn't distance her family, but her life changed when she received her plot of land from the government as well as her ShelterBox tent. And our role in this camp is an important one in that we are the only provider of tents to families that are new arrivals at this camp. So I want to show you the camp, and this is a Google image of the camp. This is when it first got started in 2013. And these white dots are ShelterBox tents within the camp. And on average, a refugee will be a refugee for about 17 years. So it could be a generation of time that these families spend in a camp setting. And so our role has been to continue our work to help internally, to help displaced people within the camp, but we also help long-term displaced families as well. And we provide things like tarpaulins for these families. You can see mats, buckets, basic items to enable their recovery. And I will tell you, really, shelter is the first step in the recovery process. Until you have a roof over your head, it's hard to get to work, kids can't get to school, and it's absolutely an essential role that we play within the camp. I want to share one story before I stop and take questions, and that is Esther. And she is indicative of why we do the work that we do every day at ShelterBox. She is what gets me up and going every single day. But Esther was a 14-year-old girl when she was forced to flee her home, and she lived in Boka, Nigeria. And the Boko Haram militant group stormed her village in the middle of the night. They raped and murdered her mother. They killed her father and her brothers, and they told her to run. And she was meant to just be target practice, as she told our team. But she made it with a group of schoolgirls to the Cameroon border, where she was taken by security forces to the camp. And she has lived there ever since. One of the things that's changed Esther's life was that she received a sewing class within the camp. She's become the best seamstress in her block of the camp. She's married, she has 2 children, and she is part of what's called the long-term displaced. And in addition to newly displaced, we help these long-term families in the camp as well with basic things to help improve their living conditions: tarpaulins, lights, cooking sets, blankets, essential things. And so she is indicative of the people that we work to find. We can't work everywhere in the world. The displacement numbers are way too high, but we do tend to focus our efforts on the poorest countries in our world and the countries that are poorest on the Human Development Index, where we can go in and impact the lives of these families like Esther's. As I mentioned, we are a project partner of Rotary International in disasters. We also have high rankings on Charity Navigator, the highest you can have, 4 stars, and as well as Platinum on GuideStar for our efficiency and effectiveness. We are a very small team and small staff team globally. We have far more volunteers than we do paid staff, and many of our volunteers and staff members are Rotarians. And so we would encourage, and I want to encourage you to get involved. How can you help? There are so many ways. Volunteering. You may be interested in the response team program, but we also have an urgent need in the United States for ambassadors. Those are folks that really help share the work of our organization. We also need Rotary Club champions. And so Caroline, I know you want to pass the baton and we need some champions. So please let me know if you're interested, but also donate. We rely on private charitable support to do this work, and we couldn't do it without support. During times like Ukraine, we do get designated restricted donations for Ukraine, and we did get a large amount for that response. But so much of our work that we do on an ongoing basis doesn't make the headlines. It's life-saving for these families. So if you can individually get involved or as a club, we know that you've been a hero club in the past, and we so appreciate your continued involvement and support. It's crucial, and it's the only way we do this work. And then sharing socially. If you can share our work, we're on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, and it's a great way to help spread the word. I am going to stop, and I'm going to ask for some questions, but I've also put my email address up here too. If you have any interest in getting involved, we need you. And I want to say a big thank you to a few folks. One of my colleagues who's on the line, who is a long-term Rotarian, as well as long-term ambassador volunteer and now staff member, Bill Tobin. Thanks for joining. And as well as one of our longtime supporters who's enabled so much of our work, particularly that work you heard about in Cameroon. And that's Mike Murray. Thank you, Mike, for being here. So, okay, I would love, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to have you turn off your slides so that we can see you, and then I'm going to pepper you with all sorts of questions.
Okay.
Very smart questions coming in, and the smartest is just going to be from me right off the bat. You said that that's not true. You said that there's 114 million displaced people on the planet right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, yes. Just that seemed like a really
and that is through that. Those are people who are displaced by disaster situations or conflict situations. And the primary driver is not disasters. About 70+% of that number is people who have been displaced by conflict.
That's okay. All right. So first question is, what happens to the green boxes?
So the green boxes. So I showed you the green box. That's kind of iconic with our organization's name. The boxes, it's 1 box per family with all the 8 items that go inside. The 8 items get incorporated into the people's lives. And so the boxes typically are used to store pure, clean water. They're sometimes used as a bassinet for a baby. They're sometimes used to hold personal effects for the family, just store your things. And then the items that we provide, so things like the tent, families will be living in the tent for a period of months. And then afterwards, we've seen amazing things with these tents. In places like the Philippines, where we have Operations Philippines, we deploy a lot because it is subject to so many typhoons. We've seen these tents become sorry shops, and on the side of the road in these barangays, they become someone's shop after they're able to move into more permanent housing. We've also seen them rent them out to tourists on the beach. We saw that after Typhoon Haiyan. So it's incredible to see how valuable these aid items are. And I know a lot of people think about the tents and the shelter, but some of the most valuable aid items we provide are things like the cooking sets, the stainless steel cook sets, and that the cooking enabling a sense of routine and restoring a sense of normalcy, just being so crucial to these families. And it's amazing to see them incorporate these things in their lives. We also see the tool sets that we provide with the shelter kit. The tools are then used to help with their livelihoods. Sometimes they're helping to do farming after with the tools. So it's amazing to see the longevity of these aid materials.
Yeah, that's cool. I liked seeing the soul. I think that amused me.
Mm-hmm.
You touched on this real briefly in Africa, but the question is, how is climate change impacting your work around the globe?
It's increasing our work for sure. The climate-related emergencies, and it's, right now it's causing us to deploy in places like Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. They're seeing widespread drought, the worst in nearly 50 years. And what you're seeing is a huge movement of people really searching for food and water. Livestock is dying. And so it's displacing the people who are already the most vulnerable. So it's causing for us to really increase our work for sure, for certain. And, it's just a real driver of displacement. There's no denying it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Apart from Rotary, what's your other funding sources?
So our funding primarily is, our number one source is private individual charitable support, as well as foundations. And after that is Rotary. And so it's individuals like you, me, who contribute to the cause and get involved and donate. And I would say one of the things about our organization's work is people think about us in natural disasters on the worst day ever, when we break the headlines. And the reality is our work is every single day. And so we are very fortunate that we've had support of people who recognize and understand that our work continues. It's quiet work, but it's life-saving in especially a lot of these conflict zones. And so the largest is just individuals who support the work on an ongoing basis. And then some private foundation work. We have a very amazing supporter in LDSC, Latter-day Saints Charities, who's been a big supporter of our foundation's work, which has been an incredible boost. So it's all sources, but I would say, I hope that answers your question, Rotary as well.
Yeah, that kind of leads us into the next question, which was, there are a lot of urgent needs around the world. How do you prioritize between and how do you deploy to be effective? Like, how do you prioritize?
Yes. So one of the ways is we really look at just the overall humanitarian needs in a particular disaster. We look at where that country lies on the Human Development Index. We look at has the government requested international assistance? Can we ensure that our aid is going to get to the families that we need to get to? It's only been really this year since we started a project in a place in Yemen, one of the most dangerous countries to work in, where we have trusted distribution partners that we work with. So we also look in areas where other aid organizations aren't going. So we want to avoid duplication of our efforts. One of the places we did not deploy aid was in Poland. With the refugee crisis with Ukraine, there was an avalanche of charitable support that was really going into Poland. We decided to direct our efforts to the poorest country in Europe, which was Moldova. And a lot of host families and a lot of people fleeing in there. They had the highest percentage per capita of the population of the country going in there, and people desperately needing support. So we also try to look at where people are being missed and where people are being left out. And so we really focus on the most vulnerable.
Okay. Have you been able to acquire materials despite supply chain challenges?
We have had a lot of supply chain challenges, just like everyone else, and it's definitely slowed our work down. We were fortunate in some situations we had pre-positioned aid, and that has helped us a lot. When we pretty much drawn down on almost everything we've had to deploy to some of these disasters this year, but we're a model of pre-positioning. So we're always working to then resupply our warehouses, which are all over the world that we can draw down on supplies. But yes, we've had definitely delays as a result of the pandemic. There's no question. But we've also been able to start to innovate in other ways beyond our traditional aid package, where we have provided things like small multi-purpose cash allotments in some situations to help procure materials locally that we need to as adjunct to our tarpaulins and the tools and supplies. So we've also looked at some local procurement models as well.
Okay. Some members want to help promote you. Are you and ShelterBox on Twitter?
Yes, ShelterBox USA. Yes, so look for ShelterBox USA on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. It's a great way to share our work. We would appreciate it if you could like the pages as well, and then share. That would be tremendous.
Awesome. What's the general cost of a basic ShelterBox kit?
Yes, so a basic shelter box, like you see behind me, which that gentleman is repairing his home, and he's living in a shelter box tent with, and it's the box, it's the aid materials like the light, water purification, the tools, the blankets, the ground mats. That is $1,000 delivered. The shelter kits, like you saw that we were using in Ukraine, those shelter kits are $100. And then on our website, the ShelterBox USA website, we have a page called Stock the Box. And you can see the price of each of the aid items. We're in a big campaign right now to help us resupply our aid items into our warehouses. So everything from solar lights to tents to tarps. So you can get a sense of the price of each of those aid items. But the box is $1,000 and the kit is $100.
Did I miss this somewhere? But where's your distribution center?
So we have several. So we pre-position aid at the International Humanitarian City in Dubai. We have aid pre-positioned in Panama. We have a warehouse in Cebu, Philippines, where we pre-position aid for the Philippines use. So we have strategic locations all over the world that we pre-position aid. In our Ukraine response, we had shelter kits pre-positioned in Belgium. So it varies across the world. And we pre-position aid that we're likely to draw down on within that region and need within that region.
That's smart. Refugees are at high risk for sex and labor trafficking. Does any part of your program specifically address this risk area?
Well, we recognize that women are disproportionately affected by disasters and specifically conflict situations. So you asked about how we prioritize our work. We prioritize the most vulnerable. Those are often women. They're often children. They're child-headed households. They're elderly and disabled. And we do really work to provide the aid items to those most vulnerable and work on specific programs to help train women. Things like our lights that bring a lot of safety in some dark refugee camps that can be particularly dangerous. But we do often prioritize needs, and we often focus on women, and we recognize that they are disproportionately affected in so many ways, from women experiencing gender-based violence to children being out of school. So we do work to try to prioritize their needs.
So go one step further with the, one of your opening slides had like a little kid's bib, like a little onesie, yeah?
Yeah.
How do you know what to pack into one of these boxes? How do you know if there's a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 40-year-old?
That's a great question. It's a great question. And one of the things that we do, because when we first got started 22 years ago, we had a one-size-fits-all approach, which was called a shelter box. So much of what we do now is customized aid packages that are done based on assessments. When I first deployed to Poland for our Ukraine response, we didn't just send aid items in, we determined what they needed first. So right now, particularly for the clothing piece, we are getting ready for what we call Syria winter. We're also doing Ukraine winter, where we look at what are the needs of the families that we're going to support, how many, what types of shelter support do they need, what types of clothing. So we do children's clothing, but we do certain things like helping with baby onesies. We also do coats. We also do boots because children die of exposure in places like Syria in the winter. So we actually do needs assessments first to determine how many families, what are the size of the families, what are the makeups of the families, so we can best be able to allocate the right types of aid to those unique needs of the families that are getting served by that particular project. And a project for our organization is roughly around 2,000 families at a time, which is just over 10,000 people.
That's interesting. I was wondering about that too. So David, I think your question was just answered. So I'm going to go on to the next one. Have you ever been denied entry into a conflict zone, a redistribution area, or a country?
Bill, I'm going to have you unmute and help me answer that question.
Oh, she's brought in the posse.
Well, no, not directly. We have not, but we have come up against so many obstacles that it's just not going to be possible to continue forward into certain countries. So the fact that we're in a country like Yemen, I think speaks volumes to both the legitimacy of what we do and the need of why we're doing it.
Yeah, okay.
And I wouldn't say it's denied entry as much as if we don't have the confidence that we can get the aid directly into the hands of the end user, we won't work there. And we are typically a boots on the ground, whether it's through our own staff and volunteers or our trusted partners. But if we don't have that confidence, we won't work in that location, which is why it took us so long to say yes to Yemen.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just in the most insane logistics business. You're not really in the shelter business. You're in the logistics business. It's just, as a right brainer, I'm going to have to watch this all again because it fries my head. That's just me. I am curious. You said in your slides, Kerri, that 1 in 10 people make it through your training.
1 in 30.
Excuse me. 1 in 30. Take us there for a couple of minutes. Take us through the training and why is it only 1 in 30? What do you do? Is it like a boot camp on steroids? What's happening here?
So I really believe we have some of the most highly trained people in emergency response. And that tends to attract, particularly disasters. My phone rings off the hook. I'm ready to go. I'll go anywhere you need me. And it tends to attract a lot of really type A people. But really what we need are people that have a variety of skill sets that work really well across a team. And you work, and it's not, we do always have a team lead, but it's people who can work really cohesively and collaboratively together. And this is a big commitment. This is not a one and done commitment when you're signing up to be a response team member. You train every single month like reservists. You have to deploy at least once a year for a period of weeks, leaving your family behind. And so I would say, it's not necessarily the physical demands. I would say it's a lot of the emotional demands and really the readiness to do this type of work. And we're also looking for really a cross section of people from around the world with a variety of different skills. It could be housing and engineering type skills. It could be logistics and supply chain experience. It could be language skills. So we're also looking for a really diverse mix of capabilities.
I'm going to speak on behalf of all of us on the call today that we hope that you do win a Nobel Prize because this is sick, crazy stuff. I got 2 minutes left for 2 questions. So this is kind of going to happen fast. Do you collaborate with any other organizations that may provide similar services?
We do. We work with groups like, as I mentioned, Habitat for Humanity and a lot of our natural disaster responses. We work with the Red Cross. We typically provide training on how to use on shelter. We provide aid materials. We provide a lot of assistance with monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Sometimes these local organizations like Red Cross, like Rotary, or even like Habitat, they help really build our response with volunteers. And so it's usually we're providing the training and the materials. They're helping provide more manpower in terms of support.
Take us there with the Red Cross just for 30 seconds. What's that relationship look like?
It's a really collaborative one, and we work really boots on the ground with Red Cross and a lot of natural disaster responses. And Habitat's another one that's just extraordinary. We've done some great responses in the past few years. A big disaster in Honduras that we worked hand in hand with both organizations, including Rotary as well. And so they help at all phases of doing needs assessments, to helping connect us locally with the community, government, and local leaders. They help us with logistics and supply chain. They help us building tents and shelter structures. They help with monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which is a huge part of our organization's work to really validate the impact we've had on these communities. So at any stage of the response, they're helping us, but it's the local habitats, it's the local Red Cross organizations that are working alongside us, local Rotarians.
Yeah, I get that. Kerri, thank you so much. Do not stop what you're doing. This is literally changing the world as we know it. So thank you so much. Thank you for spending the time with us today. And I hope everybody that's on the call today had a really good time, because it was kind of mind-bending. And so we really appreciate what you do and you do for the world. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much.
As part of that, we also want to say thank you so much for your presentation by recognizing that we have generously, that Cell 4 has contributed to Harvest Against Hunger, which provides healthy meal components to food banks. 600 servings of healthy produce have been donated in your name today. So it's the least we can do to give back to you. So thank you again for being here. And Bill, thank you for chiming in. We're going to go through a couple of things, and then I've got a couple of things to wrap up. I want to give a quick shout out to two of our gold sponsors. There are some things, as President Beth said last week, there's a lot that goes in behind becoming a gold sponsor. And we want to appreciate all of our sponsors, but particularly the gold sponsors. When it comes to gold sponsors like Liz, this is a standout person in a standout organization in our organization. So we hope that it comes top of mind that if you've got real estate questions, needs, solutions, that something like Liz and Remax is exactly the kind of place that we want to go to support. So it's not just giving us money and say, hey, look, I'm being this gold sponsor, that we pay that back. So I just wanted to give that a quick shout out. And then also to Bob, that was pretty funny. How many months have I said that? We also want to give a special shout out to Bob too. His is more of a donation, but without that kind of mindset like Liz and Bob, we would not be able to do the extra bits and pieces that we do. It's like a miniature version of what Kerri just talked about. So every little bit helps. So we just wanted to give a quick shout out to Liz and Bob for everything that they do. And I want to make sure that we give back to these guys as much as possible, particularly Liz.